Coming up on the show today, the death toll in Israel and Gaza continues to rise.
The bodies of more than 260 young music festival goers were discovered Sunday.
Plus, the geopolitics of Saturday's attack.
Decisions to engage in war by these groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and others can only happen with explicit prior direct agreement from Iran.
And later, we're in New York City for a rally in support of Palestinians in Times Square and a rally for Israel on the east side. And a look at what to do with some 350 luxury vehicles in Gabon. Today is Tuesday, October 10th, and this is VOA's International Edition. From VOA headquarters in Washington, I'm Steve Karish. We'll take a look at some of the larger geopolitical implications of Saturday's invasion of Israel by Hamas. But first, an update on the fighting. Israel has announced a complete siege of Gaza. That means it'll cut off food, water, and electricity. The death toll in both Israel and Gaza continues to climb as fighting continues for a third day. Linda Gradstein reports from Jerusalem.
Palestinian health officials said several dozen Palestinians, including women and children, were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Jabalia refugee camp Monday in Gaza. The health officials said more than 500 people had been killed and 120,000 had fled their homes to schools and other areas of Gaza. Ibrahim Nofal is a resident of Jabalia.
More than 4 homes in the Al-Trans area in Jabalia were destroyed without warning. More than 50 or 60 martyrs, a lot of casualties, unbelievable devastation. Oh my God, they are pulling out people now. Oh my God.
In Israel, the country remains in shock over the largest death toll in 50 years. The bodies of more than 260 young music festival goers were discovered Sunday. Hamas gunmen kidnapped more than 130 Israelis, many from the festival, and took them to Gaza. One of those missing is 21-year-old Adi Maisel. Her mother, Ahuva Maisel, spoke to journalists Monday.
It was our last call in which we heard a lot of noises and shootings and bombing and chaos, total chaos. And that was our last call with Adi. And since then, we have no exact, accurate position of her, where she is, in what condition she is. We don't know if she's alive or not. We don't know if she's somewhere bleeding. We don't know if someone abducted her. And we're just helpless.
Israel says it has now taken over all 22 communities where hundreds of Hamas gunmen had infiltrated and killed civilians. Israel is now on the offensive, and officials have vowed to make sure Hamas no longer has a military capability. Analysts say Israel will have to work hard to regain its deterrence. David Wormser is the former Middle East advisor to former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney.
The image of weakness that Israel now suffers under because of the catastrophe of the last 48 hours is something that it cannot come out of the war from. If it does, it will affect both peace and war and in the future. Those in the region who want to make peace with Israel fully understand what Israel has to do here. It has to essentially achieve a strategic victory on a level that erases and overpowers, transcends, so to speak, the strategic defeat.
Israel has called up hundreds of thousands of reservists, and many expect a ground invasion of Gaza in the coming days. Israeli officials have told the public to prepare for a long confrontation of at least several weeks. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
Iran's support for the Palestinian group Hamas is in the spotlight after Hamas militants crossed into southern Israel on Saturday, attacking civilians and soldiers. Several hundred Israelis and Palestinians have been killed as the conflict rapidly escalates. Henry Ridgwell has more from London.
The Hamas attack on Israel Saturday took most regional powers by surprise, but many analysts say Iran would have approved the assault in advance. Lina Khatib is director of the Middle East Institute at SOAS, University of London.
Iran has been for several years supporting Hamas through funding and through training and through military equipment. Decisions to engage in war by these groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and others can only happen with explicit prior direct agreement from Iran. But this is very different from saying that Iran ordered these groups to do these attacks.
Iran has described Hamas's actions as the manifestation of resistance, but denied any responsibility. Israel's President Isaac Herzog blamed an evil axis whose base is in Iran. Israeli officials say there is no direct evidence that Tehran directed the attack. Khaled El-Gindi is from the Middle East Institute in Washington.
This is an operation that was launched by a Palestinian group for its own Palestinian reasons. Hamas is not an operative or a proxy of the Iranian regime. Although there may be convergences of interests.
What interest would Iran have in renewed conflict between Hamas and Israel? Geopolitical alliances are shifting fast. Saudi Arabia and Israel are attempting to normalize diplomatic relations, supported by the United States. The Palestinian Authority, a domestic rival to Hamas, is taking part in the talks. Again, analyst Lina Khatib.
The deal involved Saudi Arabia talking to the Palestinian Authority. Hamas was not part of this discussion, and therefore Hamas felt, first of all, that it needed to be part of any solution to the Palestine-Israel conflict. And so we're talking about a geopolitical context in which Hamas and also its backer Iran want to set the political agenda.
Meanwhile, Tehran's negotiations with the West over a return to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and a lifting of sanctions have stalled. Khalil Jashan is the executive director of the Arab Center, Washington, D.C.
Troublemaking is negotiating by other means. And I believe that this is applicable to this situation. I'm not sure Iran is seeking a larger confrontation. As I said, it's probably seeking attention and seeking basically to convince the big powers involved in the region, particularly the United States, to take Iranian role in the region seriously.
Washington should reassess its Iran policy, argues Khatib.
U.S. foreign policy has focused on Iran's nuclear file and has, in a way, pushed Iran's regional role to the margins. I think there is now no denying that Iran's regional role needs to be central to U.S. policy.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Sunday he had not yet seen direct evidence of Iranian involvement in the Hamas attack. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Monday his country's response would change the Middle East. He did not elaborate on what this meant. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News, London.
And as we just heard, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said he saw no evidence of Iranian involvement in the attacks. With another view is Jonathan Spire. He's director of research at the Middle East Forum based in Jerusalem.
Because the U.S. administration has a very definite view of the kind of policy it wants to promote vis-a-vis Iran. And that is one where it tries to give Iran some of what it wants in return for Iran keeping quiet. And as a result of that, it seems to just be not willing to accept new evidence of what Iran is actually up to. And this is the only explanation I can find for the latest statements by Secretary Blinken, because it is not a secret that Hamas's military capabilities are absolutely dependent on Iranian support. They don't have any capacity without the Iranian support. So why that is not being admitted by America, I think it relates to the broader policy regarding Iran, which the United States wishes to pursue and which it is not willing to abandon, even in the face of very strong evidence that the policy is not producing good results.
That's Jonathan Spire of the Middle East Forum. He was speaking with VOA's Dakhil Elias. And here are some more stories we're following from around the world. Longtime environmental lawyer and anti-vaccine activist Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said on Monday he will run for president as an independent and not as a Democrat. It adds a wrinkle to a 2024 race headed towards a likely rematch between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. Security concerns have been raised in Liberia following the deaths of at least 2 people in pre-election violence. Political watchers say campaign messaging has deepened political divides, and they're calling on the national police to be more proactive during the presidential and legislative elections set for Tuesday. And U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said on Monday that he was grateful for a strengthened statement from China condemning the killing and kidnapping of Israeli and foreign civilians by Hamas issued during a bipartisan congressional visit to Beijing that included a lengthy meeting with President Xi Jinping. With Saturday's attack on Israel saturating the global news media, people around the world are reacting with large-scale rallies. Aaron Rennan has the story from New York.
Two separate protests engulfed the streets of New York City on Sunday afternoon. In the first, hundreds of pro-Palestinian demonstrators assembled in Times Square to express their support for the Hamas attack on Israel that has claimed hundreds of lives. The attack, they argue, was justified. Munir Atala is a New York City resident.
I think anything that we see has to be viewed in its historical context, right? It has to be viewed in the context of 75 years of ongoing Israeli ethnic cleansing, displacement, and violence against Palestinians.
Maria Gill is a New York City resident.
To blame them for reacting is absolutely horrific. I'm not pro-violence for anyone, but this is horrific. And I want people to understand Palestinians are people, and they deserve to be free.
On the other side of the city, in front of the United Nations headquarters, hundreds of demonstrators gathered to demonstrate solidarity with the people of Israel. Shimon Carney is a New York City resident.
The point to be here is to support the Israeli government against the crimes of the Hamas regime and to support the Israeli people, my people. I'm here, I'm crying with them. Soon or later, we will hunt them, each and every one of them.
Many expressed incomprehension of the Hamas militants' raid. Ellen Wiseman is a New York City resident.
They're kidnapping small children and babies right out of their beds in their homes. And they're using them as pawns to try to free terrorists. This is insane.
Against the backdrop of street protests, Mayor Eric Adams of New York City affirmed his steadfast support for Israel on Twitter. In a moment when innocent people are being slaughtered and children kidnapped in Israel, it is disgusting that this group of extremists would show support for terrorism. I reject this. Do not use our streets to spread your hate. As the conflict is still in its initial stages, demonstrations like the ones in New York City Sunday will likely continue. Aaron Rennan, VOA News, New York City.
From Washington, it's VOA's International Edition. I'm Steve Karish. There's a plan for some pretty hefty wealth redistribution in Africa. We'll hear about that a little later in the program. Up first, though, some news from Washington. President Joe Biden was interviewed as part of an investigation into his handling of classified documents by special counsel Robert Hur, the White House counsel's office reported on Monday. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland in January named Hur as special counsel to probe the improper storage of classified documents at Biden's Delaware home and at an office set up for Biden after his 2009 to 2017 vice presidency. A wider-ranging inquiry into handling of classified documents has also been directed at Biden's main Republican potential rival in the 2024 elections. That's former President Donald Trump, who has been indicted in his case. And now VOA's Kim Lewis has the latest from Afghanistan, where an estimated 4,500 people were killed in earthquakes over the past few days.
Saturday's magnitude 6.3 quake hit a densely populated area in Afghanistan's western province Herat and was followed by strong aftershocks. That's Mola Jan and Sayek, spokesman for the Ministry of Disaster Management. The quake also trapped hundreds, and people have been digging with bare hands and shovels to pull victims, both dead and alive, from under the rubble. The U.S. Geological Survey said the quake's epicenter was about 40 kilometers northwest of the city of Herat, the provincial capital. Kim Lewis, VOA News.
In opening the UNHCR's annual refugee conference, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees warned that aid fatigue is growing at a time when a record number of people are fleeing conflict, persecution, human rights violations, climate change, and grinding poverty. Lisa Schlein reports for VOA from Geneva.
United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Filippo Grandi says the Hamas attacks against Israeli civilians and Israel's response in the past few days will cause more suffering for civilians on both sides and increase instability in the region. He describes the violence as another dangerous piece in a growing mosaic of crises. At the start of the UNHCR Refugee Conference Monday, he noted it is mainly conflict that has driven forced displacement to a record 110 million people, the highest in decades. As conflicts grow, he warns, so does disrespect for international humanitarian law. During a visit to Egypt, South Sudan, and Chad this summer, he says he met refugees fleeing the devastating conflict in Sudan who spoke of the destruction, death, torture, and rape they left behind.
They recounted how they had to run from the brutal violence that erupted without warning on the 15th of April. Their lives upended as suddenly as were those of the Ukrainians the year before and of many Ukrainians now facing every day the death and destruction resulting from the Russian invasion.
Grandi says these stories are those of all 110 million people around the world who have been forced from their homes by conflict, violence, and persecution. He says the global situation is dire and getting worse. He notes violence continues in many places, such as in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where nearly 1.5 million people have been displaced this year alone. The High Commissioner says he's extremely worried that underfunding hampers UNHCR's operations. For example, he notes the $1 billion plan to help refugees from Sudan was just 25% funded. He adds this is only one of many humanitarian operations that are short of cash this year, and we're forced to make drastic cuts in food rations, protection needs, and other services. Lisa Schlein for VOA News, Geneva.
Gabon's military-appointed government says it will invest about $11.6 million and distribute close to 350 luxury vehicles said to be part of ill-gotten wealth recovered from the family and friends of ousted President Ali Bongo since the military junta took power about 6 weeks ago. The government says the money will be used to provide public social amenities such as water, electricity, and education. Moki Edwin Kinzeka reports from neighboring Cameroon.
Gabon's military junta says the government appointed by transitional president General Brice Clotaire Oligui Nguema has begun consultations to determine how best to use the items recovered from state functionaries and business executives under the rule of ousted President Ali Ben Bongo. Raymond Dong-Sima is Gabon's prime minister.
Sima
says Nguema instructed him to meet with all government ministers before investing ill-gotten wealth recovered by the military junta since it seized power on August 30. He says Nguema has launched an irreversible battle against impunity and corruption, and the military junta's government wants to recover all ill-gotten wealth. Sima said on Gabon State TV on Monday that the junta has recovered about $11.6 million and close to 350 luxury vehicles over the past 45 days. Ngema told Gabon's state TV that he has issued guidelines on how to distribute the recovered vehicles. Ngema says the 344 vehicles his government recovered from current and past senior state functionaries and partners of former President Ali Bongo should be distributed to government institutions, especially schools, universities, hospitals, and water and electricity companies that need them to improve the conditions of citizens. Joseph Marie Efodo is a lecturer in political science at the University of Yaoundé. He says Ngema does not want to be seen as someone who betrayed the public in Gabon, which appears to support the August 30 coup. Before the coup, the Bongo family ruled Gabon for 56 years.
C'est la question de que faisons-nous maintenant?
He says Ngema is carrying out historic changes less than 45 days after he seized power to prove to the international community that the military junta he leads saved Gabon from a long iron-fisted rule that impoverished civilians of the oil-producing nation. By doing so, he says Ngema expects the international community to lift sanctions imposed to press for a return to civilian rule in Gabon. Gabon's opposition and civil society groups say the government also needs to investigate real estate empires and huge amounts of money hidden in foreign banks by the Bongo family and their close aides. They say bringing back the money could ease high levels of poverty. Moki Edwin Kinzeka for VOA News, Yaoundé, Cameroon.
And that's going to wrap it up for us today. This has been International Edition on the Voice of America. On behalf of everyone at VOA, thanks for joining us. For pictures, stories, videos, and more, follow VOA News on your favorite social media platform and online at voanews.com. Until next time, I'm Steve Karish in Washington. Stay safe and have a great day.
Next, an editorial reflecting the views of the United States government.
During a recent conversation at Rice University, Secretary of State Antony Blinken emphasized the world is at an inflection point.
We have the end of an era, the post-Cold War era. We have an intense competition that's underway to actually shape what comes next. One of the competitors is Russia and Putin's Russia. And the actions that he's taken are a demonstration that he rejects the order as it's been, or for that matter, the maintenance of the basic premises, the basic principles that define the order: territorial sovereignty, independence.
Secretary Blinken said in the face of Russia's full-blown invasion of Ukraine, people understand if Putin is allowed to act with impunity, then the message to would-be aggressors anywhere and everywhere is we can get away with it too. And that's an invitation to a world of conflict. Putin, Secretary Blinken said, is operating under an illusion.
His objective is to outlast, and he believes that he can outlast the Ukrainians, he can outlast all of those supporting Ukraine. But he's already made a profound miscalculation, and that has played out in a way that's been historically detrimental to Russia and its interests, because I think he believed from the outset that no one was going to stand up to the aggression.
Not only are the Ukrainian people and the United States proving Putin wrong, so are the dozens of countries around the world that are assisting Ukraine with humanitarian, economic, and military aid.
Often in these situations, Americans get a little bit frustrated because it seems like we're carrying so much of the load. We are, but in terms of burden sharing, in this particular instance, the rest of the world is doing a remarkable job. In fact, the assistance being provided by other countries exceeds the assistance that the United States has provided, as significant as that's been.
The fundamental problem is Putin's belief he can outlast, said Secretary Blinken. But on the part of those standing up to Putin, Mr. Blinken declared, there remains a tremendous determination to see this through, not only to make sure that Ukrainians come out on the right side, but that all the rest of us do too, because if we let this go, then we're opening a world of hurt for many years to come.
That was an editorial reflecting the views of the United States government.